Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock. Thanks for joining us. We will go ahead and get started. My name is Jason Vandiver. Oh, unmute myself. Okay, my name is Jason Vandiver, Energy Code Program Manager for SPEER. Thanks for joining me this morning. Charlie Hack with NAIMA and I gave this presentation at the RESNET conference in lovely Scottsdale, Arizona. Few months back when we could actually still travel and have conferences together. Miss those days. So, and this is, I'll get into more of the details later. Those of you that don't know, come on slides, there we go. What are we going to talk about today? Just briefly, who are NAIMA and SPEER? Why do we even care about grade 1? Installation. What's changed with the 301 standard, how that relates to the energy code, and then just getting some guidance and advice on getting to grade 1 for all installation types. Those of you that don't know, NAIMA is the North American Insulation Manufacturers Association. If the sound keeps cutting in and out, Jeremy, you can, if you'll restart, you can hop out and then come back in. That's not on my end. For some reason, every once in a while, 1 or 2 computers on every webinar. We typically have about 100 people, and 1 or 2 people, the sound will cut in and out. So I'm going to type that to you real quick, in case you can't hear me. Sound cut. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I think I skipped a couple of slides there. Oh yeah, and NAIMA is a member of SPEER and has funded a bunch of training and education I've done. Kurt Rich, the CEO there, is just a really good guy, and can't thank them enough for all of their support that they give us here at SPEER. We couldn't do what we do without them, certainly in lots of cases. And then SPEER, for any new folks on, we cover Texas and Oklahoma. We're one of 6 regional energy efficiency organizations in the United States. And basically, anything energy code related, efficiency related, we're happy to help. Whenever I tell people that aren't in the building industry that I work for an energy efficiency nonprofit, the first thing out of their mouth, oh, solar. And not really. I'm energy code centric. That is my chief role, but Cassidy Ellis, we also have a cities leadership program. So if your city's not familiar with SPEER, reach out to me. I'll be happy to put you in touch with Cassidy. If you have a resiliency or efficiency or any of those type of departments or services in your city, we can offer a lot of resources on the city side through Cassidy, one of my colleagues at SPEER. Anyway, happy to help you guys out any way you can. For the building officials on the webinar this morning, those of you that are in control of the budget for the building department, I would highly encourage you to join SPEER. It's $250 a year. And if you join SPEER for your city, that $250, I will give you and your staff all the CEUs you need, on-site training, whatever you absolutely need. I will make sure you guys don't come up short with your CEUs would be the main thing. And for $250 a year for the whole department, that's about as good of a deal as you can get. I'd like to thank Plano for joining. They joined yesterday. We have another handful of cities that have joined as well. So for the building officials that are on in charge of your budget, please join SPEER. $250 a year you really can't beat it. So why do we even care about grade 1 insulation installation? Well, code requires it. Now code, most of us here in Texas are on the 15, right? And the 15 doesn't specifically reference that ANSI standard 301, RESNET standard 301. Now the 18 does, 301 2016. And in Texas, we're going to be looking at the 2021. Lots of cities, our state energy conservation office will by statute review the 2021. And, you know, it'll be published this probably fall, late summer. And there'll, and in it, the 2021 IECC, it references ANSI RESNET 301-2019. So it is specifically referenced in the 18 and the 2021, not in the 15. But like everything, you know, as a recovering building official myself, I don't think of things from a rater's perspective. I think of things from a code perspective. And code, you know, what basically trumps code? What's the first thing code tells you? Well, per the manufacturer's installation instructions, right? Well, the manufacturer requires these products that we're going to talk about today to be installed a certain way, and that aligns with code. The standard is more on the rater's world. I do have a couple of slides I'll show you that Kelly Parker sent me a whole presentation just this morning, and he sits on the board that writes the standard 301. And so I'll just kind of briefly, when we get to those, talk about a little bit about the differences. And this presentation today is really going to focus on a kind of a higher level code official point of view. Hey, what to look for in the field. It's a whole lot of pictures. I'm not quoting ASTM, you know, again, it's from a code perspective, not a rater perspective or not a standard perspective. But certainly there will be some underlying discussions on the standard. So why do we even want to achieve grade 1? Well, obviously, you know, if grade 1 is required by the manufacturer for you contractors on today, you want to achieve it, because if you've got an insulation inspection called in on Tuesday and drywall scheduled for Wednesday, well, if you get a red tag on insulation, you know, it might be 2 more weeks before drywall can get back out. And as a code official, you know, if you see a problem on an insulation installation, now me personally, I worked in a smaller jurisdiction, so I knew all the superintendents and builders. They all had my phone number, and you know, if it was just an item or two, I might text them a picture of the deficiencies and have them text me back the corrections, and then in that way I didn't mess up the drywall schedule. And you know, but if you're an inspector in a bigger jurisdiction, you don't always, you know, you can't really do that, because you know, you're just dealing with too many builders and too many superintendents. Third-party raters, that's kind of at your discretion. I don't know if specifically RESNET says you have to put your eyes on it. I would think it would be allowable to, you know, if you sent a couple of pictures of deficiencies, to get a couple of pictures of the corrections. Makes a lot of sense to me. Energy Star certainly requires it, you know. Actually, I have a builder down in the valley I put in contact with the U.S. Department of Energy. She's looking to build some zero energy ready homes. Certainly, you would want a grade 1 for those as well. These next three slides are from the slide deck that Kelly Parker, again, sits on the 301 board, he sent me, and just kind of highlighting the difference from the rater's point of view, the standard point of view, versus the code point of view. You know, all of this is in the manufacturer's installation instructions. It's also in the standard, right? But then this is more of kind of where his presentation goes. For any of the raters that are on the call today, Kelly said, I can't release this whole presentation quite yet, his presentation, but he said it should be ready in a few weeks. They've got a few tweaks. So if any of you on the webinar this morning want a copy of Kelly's presentation, mine's about 65 slides. His is almost 100. And it gets more into the weeds on the ASTM and blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, hey, this, that, or the other. So this is what comes from his. Just shoot me an email, and I'll stay in touch with Kelly. And when this is available for release, I'll be happy to send you a copy of it as well. But again, today we're really going to be looking at the code aspect of it, not so much the standard itself. And I already mentioned that in the 2021 IECC, it references the ANSI RESNET 301, and in the 2018 it does as well, but not in the 2015 where most of us are on the call are in. So why achieve? Oh, another reason to achieve grade 1 installation. Well, obviously, we already talked about code requiring it and programs requiring it. But really, the main reason is just wasted money for the builder and the homeowner. The builder and the homeowner are requiring it. I do have a couple of polls today, so let me go ahead and launch this one real quick. Launch polling. So I'm just curious, who performs the installation inspection in your jurisdiction? If you're a rater or a third-party company, just answer the one that most jurisdictions ask you to do, or in the majority of jurisdictions in which you work. Just kind of curious. So it looks like about 60% or so, 50 to 60%, the city. I'd like to see my favorite answer really on this, to me. Now, when I was a building official, I did all the insulation inspections. Third parties were not required to do it. All the third party folks did was blower door and duct blaster testing. But, you know, I know Fox is on the call this morning, and there's probably another Chris, you know, down in Valley's on. You know, if you're a rater and you're working with the builder, and, you know, who's he going to give the stink eye to when he fails the blower door test? Well, he's going to give the person that tested it the stink eye, right? And if you're being hired by the builder, you know, that builder is going to have a whole lot better chance of passing his blower door test if you're there to do the insulation inspection, because you'll also catch the blocking and sealing and some of those details that are crucial. So looks like about 50% city, 30% third party, 24% both the city and the third party. To me, that's the best, because, you know, what happens when you get a lazy city inspector or a lazy third party inspector? You know, you get that redundancy, so one will catch. So I like to see that. I don't like to see this one person answered no one does the inspection. We must have someone from Oklahoma on the call today, because the vast majority in jurisdictions in Oklahoma don't do an installation inspection. All right, so let's go on. I'll go ahead and share the results. So y'all are viewing the poll results now. And then I'm going to stop the share and let's go on, close that out. I haven't done polls in a while. Now, this is the most important slide of any presentation I ever give. I leave it in Spanish so I can explain it. Those of you that have been on my HVAC webinars, you've heard this before, but it's absolutely worth repeating, in my opinion. You know, don't underestimate the job you guys do as inspectors, as raters, as contractors, whoever's on this call. If you're part of energy code compliance and energy code enforcement, you know, it might not matter to me. It's just a 12-pack of Dos Equis a month. It's probably better for me and my liver that I'm spending some extra money on my utility bills. But a single mom or a little old couple on a fixed income, you know, if they get into a house and their utility bill is $40 a month more than it should be every single month because somebody let, you know, a really crummy installation job pass, when are we going to go back and fix that install? Never. Once the drywall is up, that will never be repaired. And $40 a month, every single month, can mean a whole lot to some folks. So don't underestimate the job you guys do. It is very importante, and I appreciate it. So please keep up the good work. Makes it on the rater, from the rater's point of view. Now, granted, Texas and Oklahoma, we're only worried about climate zone 2, 3, and 4, or down in the valley with the new climate map. We're looking at climate zone 1 as well now. But for the most part, you know, it's a pretty significant difference in your HERS score. I mean, look at based on climate zone. I mean, a little over 6 points in the colder climate zones. And even in Texas, you know, the majority of the folks on the call today are in climate zones 2 and 3. You're still looking to 2.5 points on your HERS score. I realize that, you know, about half the homes are doing total UA through ResCheck, and the other half the homes are doing performance, and we only have 1 to 2% that are actually complying through a HERS score. But if you're using RESNET or RimRate or Ecotrope or any of the software for a performance compliance, then it also generates a HERS score, you know. And as a builder, to me, if I had a HERS score for my home, why wouldn't I, you know, give that information to the buyer? It's a marketing, lots of good things would come with the HERS score. You know, it hasn't really penetrated our market like it has in the Northeast, where Utilities really drive a lot of that stuff, and every home has one, it seems like. But it's slowly but surely gaining traction in Texas. And that grade 1. Now, from a code official's point of view, anything but a grade 1 is a red tag. So, you know, a HERS rater, and we don't really have this in Texas so much, but there's in the Mideast and the Northeast, HERS raters have nothing to do with code compliance. They go in there and do the HERS score. They're working for the utility. They're working for different people. But in Texas, it's almost always related to code compliance. You know, that third-party inspector has to send the jurisdiction a copy of the past insulation inspection so they can continue. They can get their CO, pass blower door, and all that. So let's keep going. What's changed? There's some, again, the Kelly's presentation really gets into the weeds on what all has changed. They've changed it, changed the name to dwelling and suite sleeping units now in 2019 301 standard. There's a bunch of minor changes, but there's also some fairly significant ones. Again, you know, shoot me an email, and as soon as his thorough presentation that really kind of details all this is available, I'll make sure and get it out to you. You know, like any standard, it's developed from a group of volunteers, and they reach consensus. And then there's a public review and comments portion. And then the standard gets vetted through experts, and then it gets published, and then the ICC code will reference it, and then it becomes part of code. So let's go ahead and get to the basic requirements. This is kind of part 1 of 4. I finally became old enough to realize that just go ahead and get out the instructions in the first part, because inevitably I would get that IKEA piece of furniture all the way put together, and you get that one screw left over that had to be put in step 2. So you're taking it all apart to get that back in. Well, grade 1 is always going to be installed to the manufacturer's instructions. And again, this is, this same thing was 30 years ago, when before the ANSI RESNET 301 even existed. Codes always required it to be installed per the manufacturer's specifications. And, a fiberglass bat, for example, since it's been manufactured, says install to fill the entire cavity, free from compressions, gaps, voids. So all of that is de facto requirement by the manufacturer, which is de facto requirement by code. This is a lovely job here. This is one of my ambassadors from Oklahoma sent me this, Greg Clark out of Norman. These folks actually called in for an insulation inspection, believe it or not. They might as well have not put anything up here. This effectively has an R value of 1 or less, the way that it's installed. And then we talked about that $40 a month every single month. You green tag a job like this, it's $40 a month every single month. Evidently, this builder had a vested interest in the lumber company as well. Look at this, the amount of, there's not a beam that hits here, is there? Why in the world do we have 6 king studs in a row? Kind of crazy, but that's the way it works. Wood has an R value, a 2x4 stud of about 3.5. 3.5 inches of insulation has an R value of 13 to 15. So that's just, it's silly. The less wood you can use, the better. Certainly the advanced framing, 2x6s, 24 inches on center, single top plate. You can reduce your framing factor by 20%, easy. Brought up this picture, these web trusses. Well, how in the world do you really get, does the bat installer, does he notch all of these and so they can fit tight? And luckily, Rick Blumenthal, one of Knopf's building scientists, was in my presentation. He's like, oh, no, there's a product for that. So evidently there is a specific product that will actually flare out into these spaces. I've yet to see it. To me, this is just this is almost has to be netted and blown and filled, or open cell foam would be a real good application on a web truss. This right here is, you might as well not even put anything up there. Very little insulated value whatsoever, as that hot air can just go right up against that subfloor. And the manufacturer's installation instructions would not allow this whatsoever, nor code. Foam also has to be installed per the manufacturer's installation instructions, obviously. No compressions, gaps, voids, completely fill the cavity, oops. I used to carry a little piece of number 6 copper, same diameter as the ground wire. I think it's 6, man. I've been out of electrical inspections for a while now. Just so you could hold it up next to the ground wire, make sure that that's sized right. And then it was a 10-inch piece of copper, and I had it marked by the inch, so I could just, without causing significant disruption in the foam, poke it in the foam, check my depth real easy, check it in a few spots that looked a little thin, make sure they were at their 6 inches or whatever it was that their compliance paperwork was saying. Again, code, manufacturer's installation instructions, hey, completely fill the entire cavity, front to back, side to side, and top to bottom with no gaps or voids. Most of the manufacturers also will tell you when installed in a vertical assembly, it has to be enclosed on all 6 sides with a rigid material. It's certainly in an attic, the energy code would require it, the rigid air barrier material, so all 6 sides. When we're blowing, we're looking for a specific thickness is what we're looking for when we're blowing attics and whatnot. So what I would say, and real quick, I didn't cover any housekeeping in the beginning. If you do have any questions, just type them in the Q&A panel on your screen. Just move your cursor down a little Q&A panel and drop up, type that in. And then you'll get a course evaluation today after the presentation. For ICC CEUs, simply fill out the course evaluation and you'll get ICC CEUs for the presentation. I tell builders this all the time, you go to do a CO inspection as a building official and you pull down the attic stair and you've got that, I think that might be my next slide. Yep. You have this piece of paper here, which by code, I guess, could be written on a bar napkin. It doesn't necessarily specify. Talks about inches blown and R value. But a lot of times, this one's up here. Evidently, they put it up first before they blew. I've been on more than one CO inspection where I've crawled up in the attic and it looked just like this. No insulation whatsoever. But what I tell builders all the time is, this right here will list the number of bags they've blown. Well, go out to your dumpster. I mean, if it says 27 bags of blown, I can't tell you, more than once I've gone out to the dumpster and there's been 25 empty bags. Well, maybe they didn't get the full depth in these back corners or something like that. So, as builders, double check that you're getting what you pay for, or as raters, if you go out on a job, it's like, man, it's awfully light in a bunch of spots. Go out to that dumpster and count the empty bags. And that way you can let the installer know. Let these guys know, hey, man, you said you blew 30 bags and I've got 27 empties. Would you carry 3 on the truck with you when you left? No, of course not. You're shorting the builder. Let the builder know. To me, that's added value to the builder. I'll talk about some other added value here in a minute with some of these other pictures we look at. Yeah, you're being paid as a rater or as a third-party energy code inspector to do the inspections and do the testing. But if you can add value to the builder and point out some things that are wrong that he wouldn't have otherwise noticed, that increases, again, you're just adding value. So part 2, we're going to look at insulated sheathing, kind of breeze through this a little bit as we don't do much insulated sheathing in Texas. I surely like to see the drain wrap, the crinkle drain wrap, so you can create that drainage plane behind any sort of rigid poly product. If you are installing it, you want to stagger the edge. Again, I don't have to read this to you. I'll let you read it. But these are the minimum requirements for grade 1 for insulated sheathing. Again, 2 or more layers, stagger the joints. We typically don't see a whole lot of this in Texas. I saw a little bit in Irving. We'll see a little bit in climate zone 4 for sure. Some in climate zone 3, and of course none unless you or me building in climate zone 2. We'll answer that at the end, Larry. Let's keep going. And I always love this. To me, You know, what is one place that's always free from dust, dirt, grime? Well, construction sites obviously don't have any dust or dirt. Well, you know, if you look at the manufacturer's installation instructions on tape that's to be installed at a construction site, it will say apply to substrate free from dust, dirt, grime, contaminants, oils, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm a little skeptical of tape on construction sites. To me personally, I want a sealant that'll expand and contract. It will work if done correctly, but that substrate really needs to be cleaned. And then what else does this manufacturer have? They'll have a specific roller that you back roll. I should have put in a poll and asked you folks how many have ever seen the framer back rolling tape. I'd be curious if anyone on the webinar has ever seen that. That's what you have to do to install the tape per the manufacturer's installation instructions. And again, for grade 1 insulated sheathing, that's what we're talking about today. The drainage plane joints and gaps need to be taped and sealed to the manufacturer's installation instructions. Again, there will be specific instructions. It typically requires X amount of pressure, clean substrate, back rolling. This looks like a fantastic job here. Now, I'm not 100% sure if maybe they haven't finished the head flashing, or maybe like a lot of jobs, they just don't flash the windows correctly. For the builders on the call, man, that's your number one. It's your number one liability right there is water infiltration. And for you raters on, you know, if you're walking into this job to do an insulation inspection and you notice that they don't have the windows flashed correctly, letting that builder know, hey man, I'm solving a major water intrusion potential for you, saving you from some lawsuits. Hey, no charge. It takes you all of no seconds as you're walking from the truck inside the house to look at the insulation to note, just take a quick glance at the window installs. It's very, very rare. I would say 1 in 5,000 windows in Texas actually gets installed per the manufacturer's installation instructions with the correct weather resistive barrier flashing interface on windows. Saw one in Houston the other day, was doing some field training in Houston and was shocked. It was actually the first one in the field I've ever seen that was installed 100% correctly. So again, that's just added value to your builders. You know, taking a look at these windows and the flashing and the taping, how's that installed? And with as far as grade 1 on insulated sheathing, depending on, sometimes it could be used as an air barrier. Typically is going to be a vapor retarder, and pay special attention to your drainage plane. Make sure when water gets in there, it can get out. Any kind of penetrations through the foam need to be sealed. Typically it's a, you know, low expanding urethane spray foam typically is used. There's a lot of good stretchy tapes that can be used as well. Should really be kind of trim flush with the sheathing. And then ideally you're covering it with some sort of water impregnable membrane, or a liquid applied membrane is actually the best, but it's most expensive. You won't see that just a whole bunch in the field. Again, not going to beat it up too much because we don't see a whole bunch of insulated sheathing in our market. But if you have 2 layers, you're staggering the joints. In this window head flashing interface there will be specific manufacturer's installation instructions depending on, is it a flanged window? What type of window is it? Do you put the window on before or after your weather resistant barrier? Tyvek, for example, has A, B, and C install, whether it goes on before or after. There's specific layering. You know, obviously the rule of thumb is your shingle layering and so that always comes into account. But you know, you don't tape the bottom, you don't seal the bottom. There's different specifics that go into that window install. Typically the sill needs to be sloped 6 degrees, pan flashing. I mean, a lot of this stuff is missed in the field. A lot of this stuff, for you third-party raters that aren't even looking at this for code, again, you know, help your builders out. And again, that little old single mom or little old couple on a fixed income, you know, I see a bunch of houses, particularly in the El Paso market. I mean, it's just really bad. The weather resistant barrier flange window detail, and there's going to be a lot of folks with rotten sheathing on those 10-year-old homes. You know, you got a $15,000, $25,000 repair bill on your 10, 5, 7, 10-year-old home, it's gonna really bankrupt a lot of people. So for third party and for municipal inspectors, if you're a little slower right now, just do a little bit of research on flanged window installation instructions and Tyvek or weather resistant barrier installation instructions, and look at some of those details. And I mean, I'll admit it, I want to go knock on the doors in Granbury and apologize to some of those homeowners, because at the time when I was a building official there, I didn't pay enough attention to the flanged window, weather resistant barrier details like I should have. So if you have a little time, go through those. Again, insulated sheathing, we're going to kind of breeze through it. No more than 1/8 inch gaps. So grade 2 or 3 would be, obviously this is no good, right? So part 3 or 4, getting to grade 1 with spray foam. Spray foam, for the most part, I see it applied pretty well. I know you hear horror stories about it all the time. One thing I tell you is, as raters or municipal inspectors, I've always been told from the manufacturers, if you smell a fishy odor, that's a telltale sign of it off-gassing, and off-gassing such that the homeowner will get sick. It actually will 100 times out of 100 cause respiratory distress and significant health problems. So if you ever do smell a fishy odor, if I'm a code official and I smell that, that's a stop work order on that house immediately. And I would require the foam manufacturer to come out and certify that install. I know that sounds like too much, but that fishy odor is a telltale sign. Some of these other issues we look at as we go forward, a lot of times the installer can correct those, but if you do smell the fishy odor, you do want to go ahead and pretty much shut that job down immediately, and require the manufacturer to come out and inspect and certify that job. They're going to be removing it all and redoing it, I can assure you. So the minimum, getting to grade 1 for spray foam, it has to be well bonded to the substrate, framing, sheathing, whatever it may be. As when open cell spray foam extends beyond the cavity, it's supposed to be trimmed to the interior finish level. You see that all the time, right? The big empty bags of the trimmings in the garage when you go do the inspection. It should closely fit around obstructions, which one really nice thing about spray foam, it does a pretty good job of that for the most part, just getting in there and expanding around the obstructions and whatnot. This well bonded to the substrate, from the outside, this looks like a good install. But in what I'd tell inspectors, third party or municipal, it doesn't matter, go to 10 or 12 or whatever you feel comfortable with stud cavities and just kind of lightly push on the foam. And this whole piece of foam, when it doesn't bond well to the substrate, maybe it was too cold that day when they started spraying, maybe their mix was a little off. There's probably a variety of reasons. Maybe the substrate was, there's probably a variety of reasons why it doesn't bond well to the substrate. But if you'll just take and push on this with your fingers right here, if you feel it significantly springing, well, it's not well bonded to the substrate. Leave them a red tag. Foam not well bonded to substrate. You get convective loops going in here in the cavities. You can cause moisture problems. Certainly it's a reduced thermal resistance, so you're not getting the R value of which that you should. So it should be well bonded to the substrate. Me personally, I don't know if I just had good foam installers in my jurisdiction, but for the most part, I saw pretty good foam jobs in Granbury. But I've also heard horror stories, and we'll certainly see some pictures of some pretty bad ones coming up. We talked about trim and flush. Now, oh well, this isn't completely filled the cavity. You don't have to worry a little bit here or there that's not completely filled. That's one thing. If you, in this 3.5 inch stud cavity, if you've got like inch gaps rather than, a 1/4 inch gap, I think I can live with that. But if you're going down in here an inch, or, you've got a lot of these kind of cavities, here it's just very minimal. This one's probably a little more than I'd like. for the most part, that looks pretty good to me. For inspectors, be careful. A lot of times you'll see them trimming this off. I mean, it's an electric knife. They're trimming it down, or it can be static. It might not necessarily be electric. But more than once, I've seen the sheathing and the insulation jacket nicked on the Romex. So, you know, make sure you don't see any yellow coming through the foam, or white if they're using number 14. So make sure they don't cut into the insulated sheathing. They'll know it if they nick the water pipe, but you might not notice it until it starts sparking and burns down the house on the insulated sheathing on the Romex. Because obviously this blade, I mean, that's just asking for problems. Again, you know, closely fit, so it'll go back behind the electrical boxes, around objects. This must be up in a climate zone 7 or 8. Well, it's like a 2x8 stud cavity. But grade 1 spray foam installation, closely fit around the obstructions. Now you see this messed up all the time, and typically you're looking at a fire. You know, you got a type V vent, so it's a 2-layer vent coming up from the fire. Really, the outside doesn't get hot, but it'll still typically say, you know, maintain 1 inch from combustibles on this. And what you do is there's a sleeve that'll go around this. It has little tabs that fold over, and so you can maintain that 1 inch and then foam up tight to it. Otherwise, what are you going to have here? You just got a chimney sucking that. In Texas, you know, you're just sucking that. In December, you're trying to keep this house hot, nice and warm, and you've created a chimney effect, and all that warm air is just sucking right out the top. This is no good either, right? Because you don't have that 1 inch clearance, even though on a type B, it doesn't really get hot. I don't really understand. This is an abundance of caution in my point of view. That's never going to get hot enough to make that foam ignite. But nevertheless, code says 1 inch. So you would kind of meet these two in the middle, and you would, again, it's like a collar. You could conceivably make one, but they manufacture them. It's got little tabs that fold under, and then you can foam tied up against it. To me, you know, if I'm at the framing inspection and I know that they're going to foam this house and this doesn't have a collar on it, you know, you might call that out call that out on the green tag, or I used to leave yellow tags. Hey, make sure and do this, that, or the other. I mean, on a framing inspection, when I was an inspector, I mean, maybe 1 out of 20 framing inspections would ever pass. I mean, most of mine failed, but I would fail them with what I call a yellow tag. You know, hey, here's 5 deficiencies. Correct these, and I'll check them out on the insulation inspection. That way I could keep the builder on schedule. I had a list of things that to remind myself to double check. Yeah, you see a lot of this on water heater vent through the roofs as well. Somebody chatted that in. Yeah, any kind of vent through the roof. Now water heater, you know, up in the attic, you might have a single wall pipe, depending on. Anyway, it's on a type V, I wouldn't be as worried about it, but code requires that 1 inch gap. No matter what it is, you need to make sure that you meet your combustion distances and it's able to foam up tight around it, is the gist of it. Closed cell spray foam, really same kind of deal. For grade 1, for grade 1, that 2% is the rule of thumb, no more than 2% uninsulated. On closed cell, it specifically calls out, you know, no more than ½ inch depression, or maximum 3/4 inch depression, no voids or gaps. We see not too terribly much closed cell down here in Texas, but those are the grade 1 rating requirements. For open cell, pretty similar, no gaps, voids, around obstructions. That's what we're looking at. We won't have vapor retarders in our climate zones at all. See, like this is the one that, you know, I mentioned, you know, some of these, like this cavity here, I could probably live with. Now, what if this was a 2x6 cavity, and the energy code in Texas, it's a 2x6 cavity, and the energy code compliance paperwork calls out R17 in the cavity. Well, you know, if it's got an inch gap, and it's still meeting the R17, I think you could probably effectively live with it. Now, to get grade 1, it's going to say, what does it say, right? No voids or gaps. So that's a little different from a grade 1 versus meeting meeting what's, you know, on the compliance paperwork for permit. But to me, this looks pretty bad. It looks like they should have probably put a little more foam in these cavities and got it completely filled. This is an example of a grade 2 through RESNET. Again, grade 2, never going to be applicable for code. That's always going to be a red tag. This is kind of a weird, I don't know if the foam mix wasn't quite right, if this was a temperature deal, but there's obviously some significant pock marks, some gaps going in on this foam. It's a little different yellow color than you typically see. I'm not 100% sure what's going on with this foam, but to me, if I'm an inspector, I at least want a picture of that sent to the manufacturer, and I want at least an email from the manufacturer saying, hey, you know, that's going to be okay. Any kind of you know, I've seen foam multicolors kind of got some whitish areas and some yellowish areas. Any kind of odd looking, certainly odd smelling foam, you know, it never hurt to go ahead and get the foam manufacturer to give you a little something for your building file to let you know that that's okay. And again, I'm not going to read what's on the slides. You guys can do that. And again here, and now, you know, we've got that's like an inch and a quarter gap there off that stud. This isn't going to work here. This is going to be a grade 3, you know, significant misses. This clearly grade 3. You can see in the roof deck. I mean, that's whoever paid for that. That foam installer should be ashamed of himself there. All right. So the last part, the easiest part, bat blown sprayed fibrous insulation. Although it's hard to screw up fiberglass, man, we see it all the time. You just really do. Yeah, this is that guy that always does the installs for NAIMA. He shows he's the grade 1 expert, the bat installer champion. So to get to grade 1, minimum requirements: fill the cavity, fit around instructions. This is new to 301-2019. This will be new. And this was effective in July of 2019. So for the raters on the webinar this morning, again, I'm not a rater. That's not my background. But as a code official, if I ever fall off the wagon and become building official again, I will make side stapling the bats prohibited in my jurisdiction. I will want face stapling. The drywall guys don't necessarily like the face stapling. I understand that, but it's just, in my opinion, now the bat manufacturer, these tabs are, you know, Shirley Ellis, all their engineered tabs, they'll loosen up and it'll completely fill the cavity. That's true if it's installed exactly right. So those of you that don't know the difference between face stapling and inset stapling, I know we don't see a whole lot of craft facing in Texas. This is the craft facing of the bat here, the paper. And then there's little tabs on the side that fold out. And the bat manufacturer will tell you can fold those tabs out and staple them to the face of the framing member. That's called face stapling. That's what these are, right? They cover the framing member because they're stapled to the face of it. Or the manufacturers will allow you to inset staple it. And basically you'll see that right, and it says as close to the face of the framing member as possible. So you take that tab and they'll staple it to the inside of the framing member as close to the face as possible. The drywall guys prefer that. Some drywall guys do. I can't imagine it affecting the drywall personally, but I don't install drywall. But the important part of this, that will no longer be allowed for grade 1. So kind of a difference, whereas, you know, you can have 1.5% voids and still meet grade 1, but for a code inspector, I'm going to red tag that because the manufacturer says free from compressions, gaps, and voids. Well, now it's kind of flip-flopped, and on the rater standard, you're going to have to give them grade 2 if they inset staple it. But if I'm inspecting for code, the manufacturer allows the inset stapling. So you could conceivably get a green tag and a grade 2 whereas it was the other way around before. So it's a little bit different. I like that tweak to the standard personally, because like I said, it's just too easy to mess up inset stapled flanges on craft face fiberglass bats, in my opinion. One of the Joseph Isagiri down, the code official for the city of Alton, sent me this picture. This home builder actually called in for an insulation inspection, and he went out and sent me pictures. This was one of them he sent me. They called for an inspection with it looking like this. I mean, it was every single stud cavity. So needless to say, the insulation completely fills the cavity, insulated side to side, top to bottom, duh. But just that somebody would call for an inspection with it looking like that blows my mind. I took this one in Granbury. So here's how you mess up inset stapling, right? And y'all, this picture makes a lot of my presentations just because it's so terrible. This is supposed to be stapled like this, as close to this face of the framing member as possible. It's like they tried to staple this one as close to the opposite face. Well, in that 140-degree attic air is just going to fill this cavity. These two cavities are going to light up like Christmas with that infrared gun. So, and again, it has to be completely fill the cavity. Like this, hey, completely fill the cavity, no compressions, gaps, voids. About 13 minutes left. I'm gonna pick up the pace a little bit. I see a lot of this junk. Technically, now Owens Corning actually has a product that you can, it's a little gauge thing. I haven't seen one personally, but I've been told, I don't know any code officials with one. Some raters might have one, I don't know, but it can check the R value of the blown insulation, or it wouldn't surprise me. I wish Christian Summers from Jersey Village was on. He might require it. He's as particular as any. He does a really good job with the code. But really, the only way you can do it is to cut a 12-inch by 12-inch section out and weigh the material in that foot section, and it's got to weigh a particular amount for a particular R value. Neither of those things really work in reality, in my opinion. In my opinion, what works in reality is go in there and fill the stud cavity. It should be completely filled. This stud cavity, look at this thing right here, right? I mean, you can see daylight. They should look, this little section right through here that looks really white and is kind of bulging a little bit. The entire stud cavity should look like that. It should be a little bit firm to the touch. Otherwise, what's going to happen here? Over time, all this is going to settle down. We're going to have a 2, 3, 4 foot void with zero insulation whatsoever. So on these bib products, you know, the installer is going to leave you a little certificate saying R15 in the walls. This ain't R15, I promise you, not even close. So again, what you're going to look for in the field is it's going to look pretty full, kind of like this little section right here, like right in here is pretty full. It's going to be pretty firm to the touch. It's going to be bulging a little bit. That's what you're going to look at. If it looks like this up here, or certainly if it looks like this right here, that's a red tag all day long. For bats, technically cut around any obstructions, whether it be boxes, wires, plumbing, whatever it may be, to avoid gaps and void compression. Good old plumbing walls, right? If I ever fall off the wagon, all of my wet walls will be 2x6 walls. Sneaky way to get that ordinance passed is just send it out to all your plumbers, and you would have a ton of support at your building standards board when you add that requirement to, you know, wet walls, 2x6 walls, plumber. This, again, the city of Alton sent me that one. Yeah, they called for an inspection like that. And it's a simple, you know, you split this bat, you put half behind it and half in front of it. It's not that hard. What is this? Probably our condensate line or TNP line, Romex, whatever it may be. I've written a ton of red tags from the truck. Split bats around Romex. You know, you pull up to the house in the truck, you see all the bats bulging right about 12, 14 inches off the ground. You can write that red tag from the truck. exhaust fans, can lights, no different. It's all completely filled the cavity, no construction, compressions, gaps, voids. Can lights, no different. Can lights now are IC insulation contact rated. They're supposed to be airtight. They're not really. For those of you that are finding a little extra time on your hands at home, I got a couple at Costco the other day for $7 a piece, or they make them, you can get a 24 pack off Amazon for under $5 a piece. If you've got a house like me, my house was built in '97, so my cans are non-insulation contact rated. Well, they make these retrofit, LED retrofits that are sealed. It's just a little, the bulb is integrated into the housing. And basically it's got the old school screw type. So it screws into here. And the great thing about it is it goes up and it seals up against the drywall and it's airtight. And then it actually makes it such that you can put your insulation in contact with the can. So if you're looking for some retrofit energy saving ideas, you can really, I mean, think about if you've got 30 can lights in your house and none of them are touching insulation in the attic, and your attic is 140 degrees, all of those ceiling areas in your house not only have that hot attic air coming in through them like crazy, they also aren't sealed to the drywall, and they also have no insulation. So you can kind of kill 3 birds with 1 stone by doing that LED swap out. You're saving energy there, you're air sealing, you're saving energy there, and then you can put insulation in contact with the can. So you're restricting thermal losses there. So it's highly recommend that retrofit for your houses for any of you folks looking for something to do in these stay-at-home type times. Again, inset stapling can look good. That looks pretty tight. That doesn't always happen in the field. And again, with the 301/2019, that will be a grade 2. So just kind of give your builders the heads up, or more importantly, the insulation contractors the heads up that that's coming. Real important on these, especially, you know, a bonus room above a garage is a real big area where this would be real typical with a bonus room above a garage. If this was garage on the other side of this wall here, remember these joist cavities here need to be blocked. This is just that hot attic air starting to fill that joist cavity. So code requires it be blocked and sealed. So make sure we're doing that. See, this was in a Houston job when I was doing that field training the other day. Oh, I love the blocking for the cabinets. That's going to, you know, be a whole lot more sturdy cabinets there. I like that. Problem is the bat manufacturer or the bat installer, these bats are cut right here and right here. So we've got, I don't know, what is that, about 60 square inches of exterior wall with R0 or R1.5, I guess. The 2x6 on edge is about 1.5. So yeah, they could have slid the bat back behind it and completely insulated that entire wall. So the point is, when you see blocking on walls, just stick your hand in there and make sure that that bat goes behind it. A lot of times these OSB header type deals, this is completely void. Or a lot of times what you'll see, when I was doing some field training in the valley, and it was a grade 1 install throughout the entire house. I mean, they did a really good job. It looked like the installer cared. And then at one of these headers built above the windows here, there were little bitty tennis ball size pieces of fluff that were stuffed just right in between these 2x6s. And just pulled it out, boop, completely hollow. So make sure that stuff's getting filled with fiberglass. Again, you know, single mom on fixed income. You get 5 headers in a house, and that's $10 a month every single month. And you compound it with a couple of other errors, $20-$30 a month every single month for the life of that house. We've seen this before, just real quick. And this is something, to me, I have absolutely no tolerance for as a code official. We don't see drywall clips much. Typically we'd see a 2x4 or a 1x4 on edge for a drywall nailer like this. 3 stud corners required by code. Understand, those of you down in the windstorm areas, you're not always going to get that because the windstorm inspector. The important thing to me is on the T's. It's more important. The T It takes no more lumber. In fact, actually, it takes less. That's cool. That would be called a ladder frame, or you could do a 2x6 on edge and have a drywall nailer. But if you add up all the T's, typically on a 2,000 square foot house, you've got about 15 T's, well, 3.5 inches a piece. You're looking at a section of wall, 45, 60 inches wide with R1.5 in it, when it should have R11-ish, once you reduce that bad. Anyway, it makes a big difference. Who wants 60 inches of wall with R0? No one. And it doesn't take any more lumber. It's required by code. That's a no-brainer. Make them ladder frame their T's immediately if you're not already as code officials. Now, don't have them rip them out, but just let them know, hey, this very next house, you can make them drill all those T's and fill them with foam, and they'll stop doing it immediately, I promise you. You can go through $90 worth of foam, because it's just not that hard. And it's just getting to the framer and making sure they do it right. When you're doing the wall, especially on a bib or a bat, either one, if you're doing the wall insulation inspection, just think in your head, where is blown not going to reach when they're coming in here and blowing this attic? We can barely fit Romex in this little corner, so this should have been stuffed with a bat, right? So anywhere, a lot of times decorative ceilings above tubs or whatnot, anywhere blown's not going to reach, make sure they stuff it with a bat while they're there, because they're just not going to be able to get it when they're blowing the attic. Again, we talked about blocking and ceiling details. This looks like a little ceiling where the ceiling bumps out. So this is a great example where blown's not going to reach. That ceiling goes from 10 foot to 12 foot. There's a little 2-inch gap here, barely enough for our baffles. Well, this should have at least an R30 bats fill in this area, right? Well, oh no, the blown's going to somehow go in that little 1.5-inch gap and completely fill this to R30 like it's supposed to, R38 like it's supposed to. Of course not. It's going to look like that. So wherever blown won't reach, baffles are required. This is a performance requirement. You've got to keep the blown from blowing off the top plate and blowing down into the soffit. Really a continuous soffit vent, you would need continuous baffles in every rafter cavity. They really need to, go the entire distance between the rafters. We typically don't do a very good job of making sure this is done right. A lot of times you can take a little piece of fiberglass and stuff it to help keep that from falling. Running a little, oh no, I'm right on time. We'll be all right on time. These next 3 slides will go quick. Again, this would be grade 1, less than 2% compressed. You could be anal and say it doesn't meet code, because code says completely free from compressions, gaps, voids. Grade 2, grade 3. This is those Alton picks that we looked at earlier. So just something quick for humorous. I'm be curious. Let me launch my second poll. Those of you that are doing relaunch polling, continue. And polling. Let me see here. Where is my other poll? Here's my other poll. Launch polling. Be curious if any of you are having to homeschool your children during these stay-at-home times. I love this picture here. Oh yeah, he's paying attention doing his work. She's smiling. That doesn't work that way in my house. This right here could not be less true. So just kind of for fun, be curious to see. Most of us aren't. Okay, fair enough. It looks like 60-40 aren't. About 60-40 aren't. Well, good for you. Those of you that aren't, be glad you're not, because I am. And those of you that are, the 40% that are, here's my homeschooling lessons. Be happy to give you a copy of them. So that's it today. I'm going to go ahead and get to the Q&A part section of it. And we got just 5-6 questions that have come in. Oh, real quick, I do want to show you this resource. It's available in Spanish and in English. I've shown it many times before, but typically there is a language barrier. Most insulation installers in Texas that I know of anyway are Spanish only speaking. There's my contact information. Y'all know me, but let me get out. I just want to show you real quickly that resource, and then we'll go to the questions. So this is a super all in Spanish, 12, 13 pages long, 24 pages long. So 12 pages front and back. And on a really bad job, I mean, I carried a handful of copies of this in my car. And on a bad installation job, maybe you got a new contractor in your jurisdiction that's really doing a bad job. You just leave a copy of this with the red tag and don't say a word. And it's It shows basically whether it's plumbing, HVAC boots, whatever it is, it covers everything. It shows pictures, what's wrong, what's right, and gives descriptions in Spanish and in English. Everyone will get a copy of the PDF today. So that you notice that this last slide here does have the hyperlinks to the PDF. So you will be able to get to that. So let's go ahead and look at the chat here. Yeah, so those of you just basically looking at these guides, yeah, so these PDFs will be available. I mean, the link will be available, man, and they're great, man. And I do a lot of grade 1 installation training for NAIMA, or used to back when they'd fund it, and they're still funding a bunch of other good stuff. I didn't mean to sound like that. They're fantastic, but these guides, I can't tell you how many install crews, the superintendent, production managers, like, oh man, I've never seen this, man. I'm putting it in all the new guys' trucks, right? I mean, when the new guys driving from job to job, having a picture guide in their native language, fantastic. So just FYI, that's in there. So let's go ahead and get to the questions, and we'll be a few minutes over. Valley for energy stuff. See, I've had some issues with builders using 6-inch rafters and blowing open cell. Yields approximately R20, yeah. And you will see manufacturers say that R20 foam is as effective as R38. Well, I would agree with that. In all honesty, I would agree with that as far as energy expenditure. As far as thermal resistance, that's simply not true. R30 has more thermal resistance than R20. But if you're doing 6 inches of foam, maybe it's R20, R22, maybe R24, depending on the manufacturer. What other benefits are you going to get from that R20 foam? Well, you're going to get better air sealing. The biggest benefit you're going to get when you foam the rafters is what? You get your mechanicals in conditioned space, right? And so for those of you that don't know yet, you're never going to pass a res check, which res check is total UA. If you're allowing compliance with the performance option in res check, you need to stop because it doesn't meet the performance requirements in the code. Total UA is the default in res check, but in climate zone 3 or even climate zone 2, if you put in R20, R21, because you're going to do foam and res check, and you're going to have a real hard time meeting code using the total UA path. That's why if you've got builders that want to use foam, and it typically, in my opinion, yields lower energy bills a lot of times. I mean, and it doesn't always. I mean, you can certainly do fiberglass just as well. And like I said, R38 is better thermal resistance than R20, R22, absolutely. But those added benefits can make a difference, and the performance path realizes those added benefits. So you need to be submitting performance path compliance paperwork to the jurisdiction. Now, if you go out there as an inspector and there's no paperwork, you don't know what path they're using, well then, in my opinion, you have to assume prescriptive path. And if I have to assume prescriptive path, well, I need R38, period. I mean, I need it in my HVAC walkways. I need them furred up if I've got any vaulted ceilings. You can only go down to R30 for 500 square feet. Otherwise, that needs to be furred out so I can get R38. So that's a compliance path issue. Now, don't let them turn in paperwork showing R38 when they're going to be doing foam, because it's not going to be R38. But be intelligent enough to direct them, oh, hey, you need to be turning in performance path paperwork, IC3, rim rate, ecotrope. There's various approved performance path calculations. How do you suggest dealing with a handful of low spots on spray foam? Should that be resprayed and counted as grade 2? To me, if it's a handful of low spots on spray foam, I'm red tagging it, and they're going to come back and respray. I mean, once that foam's cured, they can come back and hit those few low spots. Piece of cake, And typically, you don't have to. Most of the time, what I would see on the handful of low spots is on the roof deck. And if it is on the roof deck, it's pretty handy because you can go ahead and let them drywall the walls. And then that way, when the insulation installers maybe back in the neighborhood, it's a little more convenient. Hey, they can just come back and touch up those few low spots with the foam and hit it over the top. Okay. Last question, and then we're done. It is my understanding that you can fill the wall cavity on a 2x6 wall with only 4 inches of spray foam, as the foam is its own barrier. I see that a lot and don't want to pay for the extra insulation. If they install closed cell, they almost always fill the walls cavity halfway. It's expensive. So basically, and so what I would say is if that cavity's sealed and we're not worrying about convective looping happening in the cavity, we're not going to worry about moisture issues. Okay, best practice, absolutely, completely fill the cavity. But say, for instance, if I've got paperwork showing R15 in the wall cavity, and I've got 2x6 walls, and I've got exterior sheathing as an air barrier, so I don't need my foam to qualify as an air barrier. Depending on the manufacturer, you might have to get 5 inches of open cell foam to qualify as an air barrier. So there's a bunch of different things to think about. I mean, to me, an inch of closed cell, you get the structural addition of the closed cell, and then you go back and bib the rest of the void with fiberglass. That would be best practice. But 4.5 inches of foam in a 2x6 cavity could be a green tag. Now, I would have to get into the weeds of the new 301 standard and to see if it would allow that for a grade 1. And then when the 2021 code references that 301 2019 standard, if it wouldn't allow that, if it would require that cavity to be completely filled, well, then it wouldn't meet code, the 2021 code. But I would say it would conceivably meet the 2015 code now, as long as you're showing it on the paperwork for permit and you're meeting that R value of the paperwork. Last question. So for input, do we input R20? Yes, you would input R20 on the IC3. Now, typically at 6 inches, it's going to be R22-ish for most manufacturers. So I would say input R20 is, I would say round up, because a lot of times it works better and leads to lower utility bills. So yeah, I would say yes, on the IC3, you need to be putting R22-ish, R23 if you're doing a foam attic. So what's the fix on? Yeah, that's the fix. Yeah, you just got to make sure you're using performance paperwork or performance path calculations, not total UA, because you're not going to get your mechanicals and condition credit. So everyone will get a copy of the PDF along with the course evaluation. Just fill out the course evaluation. You'll get your ICCCUs. Thanks for joining us this morning, everyone. I think I've got 2 webinars for you coming up next week, a couple of brand new ones. So looking forward to seeing you again next week. Have a great day.